Further analysis, political commentator John Kavulich is joining me now from New York. Welcome, John. As we're hearing from our correspondent there, Dasha, new signals coming now from Moscow. So how likely is an imminent meeting between Trump and Putin, do you think?
How we all define imminent has changed so much during the last 9 months of the second Trump presidency. We do have one bit of news, and that is yesterday the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Hungary gave a name to the event. They are calling it the Budapest Peace Summit. So we have from the optics perspective, which is incredibly important, as we know, to President Trump, we have a title for the meeting. And as your correspondent said, what we don't necessarily have is a confirmation of when and where. We have increasingly heard now from European Union member countries that they're saying, hey, if it's going to be in Hungary, President Putin's aircraft isn't his Ilyushin four-engine jet isn't flying over our country, and if he does, maybe we'll force him down and arrest him. So now we're getting into the logistics, and could Budapest be replaced? Possibly, and if so, who would then be the likely candidate? It's probably Turkey.
And what did you take from that joint statement by European leaders, John, backing Trump's call to end the fighting, but rejecting, of course, that suggestion of territorial concessions?
It's great that the European Union continues to engage, and the statement is a powerful one. Their movement more towards taking some of the $320 billion in Russian central bank reserves that have been frozen and using it for Ukraine, maybe up to $140 billion, which would basically help Ukraine military budget, its civilian budget for the next 2 years. That's great. But when President Trump hears these statements, he's looking at Russia-Ukraine war in somewhat same way he looks at Israel and Gaza, which is, I'm being asked to solve your problem. And so when the European Union, as a collective, talks about that President Zelensky should have a seat at the table, or Prime Minister Starmer from the UK, or President Macron of France, or Chancellor Merz of Germany, that they should have places at the meeting table, President Trump looks at that and says, wait a minute, you can't solve, from his perspective, you can't solve this problem. You've looked to me to solve this problem. So don't think I'm going to share any of the credit for any success. However, if things go badly, then you're welcome to join in, and I will gladly share with you some of the failure.
John, if, as you say, this potential summit that we know very little about between Putin and Trump does end up being here in Turkey, that will be a disappointment to President Orban, I'm sure. Where do you think that will go? What are your predictions for how that will go? Will that be something that President Zelensky is invited to? I mean, we've of course had 2 of these meetings, not direct, of course, in Istanbul thus far, and haven't really got anywhere. So how do you think that meeting may potentially go?
The dynamics shape up for a much better outcome than the Budapest Peace Summit, primarily because you have Prime Minister Orban and then you have President Erdogan. You can't, on a scale, they don't even weigh against one another in terms of gravitas. Add to that President Trump's statements about the essentiality of President Erdogan, whether it be Gaza, Israel, Russia, Ukraine. I mean, President Trump has lavished praise upon President Erdogan, and it's always been around the fact that he's a tough guy. He has relationships with people that other people may not like, but that's what we need. So the fact that President Zelensky has been to Turkey, President Putin there a while ago, but Turkey has hosted U.S.-Russia bilaterals, has hosted Russia-Ukraine bilaterals, and it's much easier for President Putin to get to. It's a straight shot through Russia over the Black Sea, and you're right into Ankara or Istanbul. And for President Zelensky, a much easier route as well. So, if the venue becomes Turkey, I think that a lot of the stress points from having it within the European Union, and in Hungary's case, not only a European Union member, a NATO member. Turkey is a NATO member, but it's sort of uber NATO member. It's everyone's giving Turkey a lot more latitude because Turkey is able to deliver on issues that are important to the EU and specifically to NATO. So I think if Turkey ends up being the location, the potential bilateral outcomes, Russia, Ukraine, and multilateral outcomes, Russia, Ukraine, EU, NATO, Turkey, United States, I think have increased dramatically.
John Kavulich, political commentator, joining us there from New York. Really appreciate your analysis. Thank you.